She hugged a Mafia boss to avoid her toxic ex, not knowing he was the Mafia boss who'd fall for her. She didn't plan it. She didn't even think. She just moved. 1 second, her toxic ex was storming toward her in that dim, buzzing bar, yelling her name like she was property, humiliation dripping from every step he took. The next second, she grabbed the nearest stranger and pressed herself into his chest, trembling, hiding her bruised cheek against the hard muscles under his suit. She hugged a Mafia boss to avoid her toxic ex. She didn't know who he was, didn't know she'd just thrown herself into the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. All she knew was that her ex was yelling again, the entire bar staring, heat rising in her chest as the confrontation snapped everyone's attention in half. Before she could breathe, the man she had grabbed lowered his chin, looked down at her bruised face, and his eyes shifted from surprise to something lethal. Her ex kept yelling, furious, fists clenched, pacing like a rabid dog ready to attack. And she tightened her grip on the stranger's suit because she couldn't face another shouting match, another scene, another night where humiliation was the only thing her ex knew how to give. She didn't know she'd just grabbed the one man her ex should have never gotten close to. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, what time it is in your city right now, and make sure you subscribe because what's coming next is straight fire and you do not want to miss it. The stranger's hand slid around her waist slowly, deliberately, grounding her like he'd already taken ownership of the moment. His other hand tilted her chin up, taking in every bruise, every tear, every sign of pain she'd tried to hide. The room felt heavier as her ex stepped closer, shouting that she'd better come back, that she belonged with him. The stranger didn't move, didn't blink, didn't release her. He just stared past her shoulder with a coldness sharp enough to freeze the entire bar. She felt his chest rise beneath her palms, steady, controlled, but she could sense the rage brewing under his skin like a storm. Her ex lunged forward, ready to shove her out of the stranger's arms, but the stranger caught him mid-step without even looking down. His grip locked around her ex's wrist, slow and effortless, like stopping him was as easy as grabbing a falling leaf. Her ex tried to yank his arm back, too angry to understand what he had just walked into. He spat every insult he could think of, venom flying, veins bulging. She flinched at each word, her body tightening instinctively against the stranger's. The stranger watched her flinch, his jaw flexing, tattoos stretching over his skin as his anger sharpened. Then he stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her completely, still holding her ex's wrist like a steel clamp. Her ex demanded she choose him, demanded she step away from the stranger, demanded she obey. She'd spent years trying to escape this exact moment, this exact tone, this exact poison wrapped in someone who claimed to love her. And then the stranger's voice dropped low, deep, dangerous. Her ex froze. She felt the vibration of his words through his chest before she even understood what he was saying. She didn't know the stranger was a Mafia boss. She didn't know that the entire bar already recognized him. She didn't know the reason people had gone silent wasn't the argument, but the man she had clung to. Her ex, blinded by fury, didn't realize either. So he kept yelling, kept threatening, kept challenging a man who could destroy his entire existence with one breath. The stranger finally released his wrist, pushing him back a step. Her ex stumbled but came back swinging verbally, his desperation louder now, as if he sensed, on some animal level, that he had just crossed a line he shouldn't have. She felt the stranger's hand curve protectively around her hip, pulling her slightly behind him. She tried to stand steady, but her knees felt weak, her heart pounding because she knew this moment would change her life. The stranger stepped closer to her ex, closing the distance between them without raising his voice, without lifting his hands. She could almost feel the temperature drop as the two men stood chest to chest. Her ex tried to insult him again, but the boss didn't react. He leaned forward, whispered something into his ear, something that made her ex's face drain of every ounce of color, something that made his fist slowly fall to his sides, panic replacing arrogance. Something that made his entire body shift from anger to pure fear. She watched her ex step back, eyes darting between her and the stranger, shakiness settling into his movements. He tried to regain his confidence, tried to pretend he wasn't terrified, but he couldn't hide the tremor running through him now. Before he could say another word, the stranger reached behind him and gently pulled her closer again, positioning her at his side. The act alone shattered the last of her ex's bravado. She could feel the stranger's arm tighten around her waist, not aggressively, but possessively, protectively, like he'd already decided she wasn't walking away from him now. Her ex pointed at her, sputtering, demanding she explain herself, demanding she leave with him. But the stranger took a step forward and her ex stumbled back again. Each step was slow, deliberate, dripping authority. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. His whole presence was a warning. She could feel her breath catching as she realized the entire bar was watching, frozen, waiting. Her ex finally broke, muttering curses under his breath as he tried to walk away. But the stranger wasn't done. He caught him by the back of the collar, turning him around with one tug. She gasped. Her ex choked out a protest, but the stranger spoke again, quiet, deadly calm. Whatever he said made her ex's eyes widen in horror before he almost tripped over himself, rushing for the exit. Silence filled the room. She didn't even realize she was shaking until the stranger placed both hands gently on her arms, grounding her again. He didn't speak at first. He just studied her face, the bruise under her eye, the way she kept her hands clenched like she expected another blow. And then his touch softened even more, thumb brushing lightly over the corner of her cheek where the dried tear had left a trail. She whispered an apology, but he shook his head slowly, stepping closer until she could feel his breath. For a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, danger and gentleness wrapped together in one man who looked at her like she mattered. Her heart raced, confusion sharpening every thought. She didn't know him. She didn't know why he helped. She didn't know why he was still holding her like she was something fragile he wasn't willing to let go of. Then he took her hand and placed it against his chest, letting her feel the steady beat beneath his tattoos. It was a gesture of reassurance, of safety, of something she didn't understand yet. He didn't say who he was. He didn't tell her why the entire bar was terrified of him. He simply held her hand in place, like he was anchoring her to the moment. And without realizing it, she leaned into him, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but because for the first time in so long she felt protected. And she had no idea. This was only the beginning. He didn't let go of her hand, not even when the bar crowd began to move again, whispers shooting across the room like sparks. She felt the tremor in her fingers slowly calm as his thumb traced slow, steady circles on the back of her hand, grounding her in a way she wasn't prepared for. His eyes stayed locked on her face, studying every reaction, every breath, every flicker of fear that hadn't yet faded. She tried to step back, to get space to breathe, but he gently tightened his grip, just enough to make her stay, just enough to tell her she wasn't leaving his sight. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper as she asked who he was, but he didn't answer. Instead, he brushed her hair behind her ear, fingertips brushing the edge of her bruise like he was trying to erase the pain with touch alone. His silence wasn't cold. It was intentional, controlled, the kind that said he spoke only when he wanted to, not when the world asked him to. And somehow, that only pulled her deeper into the moment. Her heart thudded painfully hard, because the way he was looking at her wasn't normal. It wasn't casual. It wasn't attached. It was intense, consuming, protective in a way that made her knees weak. Then he slid his hand to her waist and guided her toward the door, keeping her close, as if the air around them was full of threats. She tried to object, to tell him she had to go home, that she didn't want to cause any trouble, but he pressed a finger gently to her lips, silencing her without saying a word. The gesture made her breath hitch, not out of fear, but something else, something confusing and dangerous. She didn't fight him as he walked her outside. The night air hit her skin like a slap, but she barely felt it, too aware of his presence beside her. Her bruises throbbed. Her arm ached from where her ex grabbed her earlier, but somehow everything hurt less with this man beside her. The street was nearly empty except for a few parked cars, But she didn't miss the black SUV idling at the curb. She didn't miss how two men inside immediately straightened when they saw him. She didn't miss how they lowered their heads slightly in something that looked a lot like respect. That was when her stomach twisted with a realization she didn't want to admit. This man wasn't just powerful. He was feared. She wanted to step back again, but he kept a gentle but unbreakable hand on her waist, holding her steady. He opened the SUV door for her. She froze. She shook her head. She tried to back away, muttering that she couldn't just leave with a stranger, that she shouldn't, that it wasn't safe. But he stepped in front of her, caging her between the open door and his body, his breath warm against her cheek. His fingers slid up the side of her neck, thumb resting under her jaw, guiding her to look at him. Her heart hammered wildly. He leaned in just enough for her to feel the quiet command in his presence. She stopped resisting without even realizing she had given in. She let him help her into the car. The door shut beside her, sealing her inside a world she wasn't ready for. He walked around and took the seat next to her, the SUV pulling away instantly. She felt the vibration of the engine beneath her feet, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. He hadn't said a single word, not one, but every second was full of meaning. Her chest tightened as she watched him remove his suit jacket, draping it gently over her shoulders. She felt swallowed by the warmth, by the scent of him, by everything he was without trying. He finally looked at her again, and she saw the storm in his eyes, a storm brewing entirely because of her. She asked him softly what he wanted from her, her voice cracking with exhaustion. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, staring at her with a darkness that wasn't directed at her, but around her. He reached out, cupping her face again, turning it gently, so he could inspect the bruise fully. His jaw clenched. His breath grew heavier. And in that moment, she knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted to know who hurt her. She looked away quickly, unable to hold his gaze. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to relive the humiliation. But he gently took her chin, turning her face back again, silently demanding the truth. Her throat tightened as she whispered her ex's name, and the reaction was instant. His expression dropped into something lethal, like he'd just heard a name added to his list. She could practically feel the air thicken with the shift. She tried to tell him not to do anything, that it wasn't worth it, that she just wanted peace, but he didn't even blink. He touched her hand again, this time intertwining his fingers with hers. The gesture was warm, grounding, intimate in a way that terrified her because she didn't know what it meant. She didn't understand why he cared. She didn't understand why he looked at her like she was something precious. She didn't understand how she could feel so safe with someone who radiated danger. The SUV slowed as they pulled up to a tall building. She didn't want to get out. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to be seen as someone who needed rescuing. But he opened the door again, holding out his hand. She stared at it for a long moment, her pulse racing, before placing her hand in his again. He helped her out and walked with her toward the entrance, as if she were royalty, as if the ground itself needed to bow to her presence now that she was under his protection. Inside, everything moved fast. A medic appeared from a side room, as if they had been waiting. He guided her gently into a chair, his hand never leaving her back. She tried to protest, but he silenced her again with a small shake of his head. The medic examined her bruise, cleaned her cheek, checked her arm with professional precision. She winced under the pressure, her breath catching, and instantly the stranger, no, the Mafia boss, was at her side, gripping her hand, lowering himself to her eye level. The medic muttered a few instructions, but he wasn't the one she was watching. She was watching the man who hadn't taken his eyes off her since the moment she ran into his arms. The man whose expression softened every time she winced. The man whose breath shook slightly every time her pain showed. When the medic left, it was silent again. She whispered that she should go home. But the way he looked at her made her words fade into nothing. He moved closer, brushing his fingers along her jaw again. She felt her heart twist painfully at the tenderness in his touch. He leaned in, forehead gently resting against hers, breathing her in like he was trying to memorize her presence. Her hands trembled as they hovered by her sides before she finally lifted one and placed it against his chest again. She felt his heart beating steadily beneath her palm, strong and unwavering. She whispered that she didn't understand why he was doing this. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes again, his expression softer now, almost vulnerable. He didn't speak. He didn't try to explain. He simply let his actions speak louder than any words ever could. His thumb brushed her cheek again, tracing the outline of her bruise, and it hit her. This man didn't want something from her. He wasn't saving her for a reason. He wasn't trying to impress her. He cared, and that terrified her more than anything else. She told him she didn't want to drag him into her problems. He stepped forward, closing the distance once more, his hands sliding behind her neck, fingers threading gently into her hair. Her breath hitched as he pulled her close enough to feel the warmth of his body radiating around her. He didn't speak, but she could feel the promise in his silence. Her problems were his now. She leaned into him again, unable to fight it anymore. Her whole body melted against his as his arms wrapped around her fully, slowly, securely. The world blurred around them. Her fear, her pain, her exhaustion, all of it faded as she let herself collapse into his chest. For the first time in so long, she felt like she wasn't alone. She didn't know the depth of the danger he carried. She didn't know the enemies who watched him from shadows. She didn't know how dark his world was. She didn't know how deep he would fall for her. All she knew was that when he held her, she finally felt safe. All she knew was that when he held her, she finally felt safe. Yet the moment that truth settled inside her chest, the world around them shifted like someone had kicked open a door they weren't ready for. Her breath stuttered as the realization clawed through her, because safety felt like a luxury she had no right to want. Not here, not now, not with danger sniffing at their heels and her past ready to explode at the worst possible moment. She tried to pull back, to catch herself, to ground her spinning thoughts, but his grip tightened instinctively, as if he sensed the panic rising through her ribs. His hold wasn't desperate. It was steady, unshakable, and that made everything worse because she wasn't supposed to need anyone. Not after everything she'd survived. Not after running for so long that loneliness became a second bloodstream. But now her heartbeat matched his, faster by the second, and the tension in the air thickened as she prepared to say something. Anything to break the moment before it swallowed her whole. He spoke first. The words hit her like a shock wave, forcing her to face the reality neither of them wanted to admit. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't offer false comfort. He told her exactly what they were up against, exactly how little time they had, exactly how her pursuers were moving faster than expected. She felt her stomach tighten as he laid the truth bare because there was no room for softness now. Not when survival demanded they stay 2, 3, 10 steps ahead. She felt his heartbeat shift too, speeding up with urgency rather than affection, though the warmth of the moment clung to both of them like smoke that refused to clear. She forced her breathing to steady, nodding even though the fear behind her ribs tried to claw its way out. She asked him what the plan was, what direction they needed to take, how far ahead they were. He didn't respond immediately, not because he didn't know, but because he needed her eyes on him before he said it. When their gazes locked, the world clicked into place with brutal clarity. They had one chance, one shot, one window, so small it might as well have been air slipping between her fingers. He told her where they needed to go, who they needed to find, and what they needed to recover before the entire situation imploded. She swallowed hard. The name he mentioned dredged up memories she'd spent years burying. Memories that made her shake her head, stepping back on instinct, refusing to believe that person still mattered. He reached forward, fingertips brushing her arm. Not to hold her, not to force her, but to keep her anchored because he knew exactly what that name meant to her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard it. But the way he looked at her, steady, unwavering, told her she couldn't escape this. Not anymore. She asked him why. Why that person? Why that place? Why that risk? He explained in rapid words, sharp and precise, cutting through her panic like a blade slicing through thick rope. It had to be done. That person had the one thing that could shift the entire balance. That person held information her enemies would kill for. That person was the only one who could expose what had been hidden for years. And whether she liked it or not, whether she trusted it or not, whether the memories ripped her apart or not, she had to face it. Because running wasn't surviving anymore. Running was delaying the inevitable. She stared at the ground, fists trembling. He waited. He didn't push. But his silence pressed against her most fragile places until she finally lifted her chin and nodded once, sharp and resolute. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with respect, and she felt something new bloom inside her chest, something terrifying and grounding at the same time. They didn't waste another second. He grabbed the bag. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder, and together they stepped into the thick tension of uncertainty, knowing the next hours could carve them into new people entirely. The road ahead wasn't quiet. The moment they reached the street, energy shifted. A car rolled past slow enough to make her muscles tighten. A shadow moved on the far side of the walkway. The air changed, heavy with the sense of being watched. He stepped slightly in front of her, not enough to block her path, but enough to shield her presence. She didn't protest. She couldn't, because instinct screamed that danger was close, too close, close enough that every footstep seemed to echo through her bones. She whispered his name under her breath, a warning instinctively woven between syllables. He heard it. He adjusted his posture. They picked up speed, not running, but moving with a type of sharp intention that said they were no longer bystanders in their own story. They were targets navigating a battlefield neither could fully map. A sound behind them made her flinch. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. He reacted instantly, pulling her sideways into a narrow path. She stumbled, but he steadied her before her balance could falter. A figure emerged at the far end of the street, scanning slowly, too slowly, like a hunter savoring the search. She felt her pulse spike. He leaned close enough that she felt his breath against her ear as he whispered a single command. Keep moving. She wanted to freeze. She wanted to vanish. But his voice grounded her again, pushing her forward as the two of them slipped deeper into the shadows. The tension was suffocating. She felt every second stretch too long, too thin, too fragile. But he kept her close, guiding her around corners, down streets, through pathways only someone with his training could navigate without hesitation. They didn't speak. They didn't dare. The pursuit was too close, the risk too sharp. She could almost feel the eyes on her back, crawling across her skin like a cold reminder of everything she'd been running from. But he didn't falter. Not once. Every move he made screamed precision. Every breath he took felt controlled. And with every moment that passed, she felt a strange fusion of panic and trust tightening inside her chest until she didn't know which feeling was stronger. They finally slowed near an edge of the district, quiet but not silent, calm but not safe. She leaned against a wall, catching her breath, but he wasn't relaxed. Not at all. He monitored every angle, scanning for threats, calculating risks, mapping escape routes in seconds. She watched him, the way his focus sharpened, the way his tension pushed through his posture, and the way his presence seemed to form a barrier between her and danger without him ever needing to say a word. It hit her then, hard, that the safety she felt wasn't an accident. He was built for this. He was trained for this. And he wasn't just protecting her because it was his job. Something deeper pulled him into this fight, something neither of them had admitted yet. She stepped closer, her voice barely more than breath as she asked how long they had before the pursuers closed in again. He didn't sugarcoat it. The answer made her stomach drop. They didn't have hours. They had minutes. Maybe less. She felt the panic swell again, but he cut through it with one sentence, sharp and grounding, reminding her that she wasn't alone, reminding her that they still had a chance, reminding her that no matter how close danger got, he wasn't leaving her behind. The words hit deeper than he intended. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not with her heart ramming against her ribs. Not with everything inside her shifting because of him. Not when the world was falling apart, and somehow the only thing that felt stable was the man standing inches away. She took a breath, then another, and finally forced the fear to settle just enough that she could speak. She asked him what the next step was. He answered without hesitation, explaining the route, the timing, the risk, the urgency. She nodded, pushing away doubts, pushing away the shaking in her hands, pushing away the voice in her mind, telling her she couldn't face the past he was leading her toward. Because she could. She had to. She wasn't running anymore. He reached out, hesitant, almost gentle, and touched her arm again. She didn't pull away. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The moment stretched between them, charged and fragile. Two people bound by danger, trust, and something neither understood yet, but both felt too strongly to ignore. Then footsteps echoed in the distance. Close. Too close. He looked at her. She looked at him. No more hesitation. They ran. Raphael didn't move. Not even when the air around them tightened like a pulled trigger. Not even when the walls felt too close. When Elena's trembling breath brushed his chest. When her fingers curled weakly into the fabric of his shirt, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. He stood there holding her, his heartbeat pounding louder than the sirens in the distance, louder than the footsteps running outside, louder than the chaos snapping its jaws around them. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her entire body spoke for her, every shiver telling him the same truth she had whispered without speaking. All she knew was that when he held her, she finally felt safe. And that truth detonated inside him with the force of a wildfire, because Raphael wasn't supposed to be anyone's safety. He commanded fear. He ruled with precision. He took down enemies with clean ruthlessness. He lived in shadows, in controlled violence, in the power of silence and threat. But he had never been someone's shelter. Until her. Elena tightened her grip suddenly, clutching him like she felt something he hadn't sensed yet. And when he looked down at her, her eyes were wide and pulled with that instinctual fear that only comes when danger is right behind you. Before he could even ask why, something slammed into the door behind them. Raphael spun instantly, pushing her behind him as the door shook again, harder this time, with straining like it was about to split. His men had been stationed outside, but these hits weren't theirs. These were desperate. These were violent. These were personal. Raphael's jaw tightened. Elena's ex was not done, and he wasn't alone. The door splintered. Raphael grabbed Elena's wrist. Move. That one word didn't need to be said. She understood. They bolted through the back hallway as the door burst open behind them, heavy boots thundering in like a stampede. Raphael dragged her around the corner just as bullets shredded the wall behind them. Elena cried out, and Raphael immediately pulled her down behind a counter, shielding her body with his. She was shaking uncontrollably now, breath breaking, fingers clutching his shoulders with desperation carved into every trembling motion. Raphael grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him even as chaos exploded around them. You're with me. His eyes said it. His grip said it. His body in front of hers said it. And for the first time, Elena didn't feel hunted. She felt protected. He rose in one movement, swift and lethal, pulling his gun from the back of his belt, and the second he leaned out to return fire, the room erupted with violence. Raphael moved with a controlled rage, taking down two men in quick, merciless shots while pulling Elena with him. She stumbled, nearly falling, but he caught her, lifting her with one arm like she weighed nothing, sweeping her around the corner as another hail of bullets followed them. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, but somehow Raphael's voice cut through it, low, steady, grounding her as he pushed her against a metal door. Stay behind me. She nodded. She didn't even think twice, because something had shifted in her the moment his arms wrapped around her, something she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Trust. Pure, unshakable trust. Raphael kicked the door open, and they slipped into the loading bay behind the building. The cold air hit them hard, and for a second Elena inhaled sharply like someone who had finally been allowed to breathe. But the relief lasted only a heartbeat. More footsteps, more voices, more danger spilling into the open air. Raphael pulled her behind a stack of crates and motioned for her crouch. She did, sliding beside him, heart hammering, breath shaking. He leaned slightly, scanning the corners, counting bodies, calculating every angle. But she wasn't watching the danger. She was watching him, his jaw tense, his chest rising with sharp breaths, his arms stretched out in front of her like a shield he'd die before lowering. This man who entire cities whispered about, was here holding her life like it was worth something. And it made her feel something she couldn't even name. His hand suddenly reached back and grabbed hers. Not roughly, not urgently, but firmly, like he needed the contact, like it was the only way he could keep himself tethered amid the violence erupting around them. Her fingers slid into his without hesitation. That tiny touch felt louder than the gunshots ripping across the lot. He squeezed once, just once, but it was enough to send a shock through her chest. Then everything exploded. Glass shattered above them. A smoke grenade rolled across the concrete. Raphael instantly turned, pushing Elena beneath him as thick smoke swallowed the air. She could barely breathe. She could barely think. Her body curled instinctively against his, her face pressed into his chest, his arms locking around her as chaos swallowed the world. She heard shouting. She heard boots pounding the ground. She heard metal clattering. But she only felt him. Only him. His breath hot against her hair. His body solid against hers. His heartbeat fierce and steady like he was daring the world to try taking her from him. The smoke thinned just enough for Raphael to grab her waist and pull her to her feet. They ran again, the air hot and thick, her lungs burning as he guided her through the blur of danger with unbreakable certainty. They burst out the other side of the smoke cloud, Raphael yanking her behind a delivery truck just as three men came charging through the haze. They didn't see them. Raphael used that second to pull Elena closer. His hand came up to her cheek, sweeping away a streak of ash that smeared across her skin. She didn't even realize she was crying until he wiped it away. She tried to apologize. The words tangled in her throat. He didn't let her speak. His forehead came down to hers, their breaths colliding. His hand sliding behind her neck to steady her. And for a split second, just a split second, the world stopped. No gunfire, no shouting, no threats. Just the two of them trapped in a moment neither of them had planned for. Neither of them understood, but both of them felt like a punch to the chest. Her lips parted. His breath grazed her mouth. Then, a crash behind them. Both their heads snapped toward the sound. Raphael pulled back instantly, his expression sharpening again, that brief softness swallowed by the instinct of a predator ready to strike. But Elena saw it. She saw what flickered in his eyes before he masked it. Something dangerous. Something vulnerable. Something that terrified her in a way nothing else had, but in a way she didn't want to run from. Raphael grabbed her hand again, and they bolted toward the side entrance of the adjacent warehouse. The door was locked. Raphael didn't care. One slam of his shoulder, and it flew open. They ducked inside, letting the door slam shut behind them as the sounds of pursuit echoed outside. Inside was dark, silent, heavy with dust and shadows. But for the first time in what felt like hours, they weren't immediately under fire. Elena sagged against the wall, chest heaving, legs trembling. Raphael stepped in front of her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. She looked up, breath shaking. He looked down, expression carved with stone and fire. And that tension between them, the one that had been building since the second she hugged him, snapped taut. She whispered his name, not out of fear, but out of something else entirely. Something dangerous, something real. And Raphael froze, because no one had ever said his name like that. No one had ever looked at him like that. No one had ever clung to him like safety instead of survival. His hand lifted slowly, hesitant, almost unsure, and hovered near her cheek like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch her again. But she leaned into it. His fingers brushed her skin. Heat shot through both of them, and Raphael exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the moment she ran into his arms. Her lips parted again. His thumb grazed her jaw, and then a voice outside shouted Elena's name. Loud, aggressive, too familiar. Her ex Raphael's entire expression darkened into something lethal. Elena flinched. Raphael stepped closer, his voice low and vibrating with a promise of destruction. "He's not touching you again." Elena swallowed, her breath shaking. For the first time in her life, she believed that. More footsteps thundered outside, growing louder. Raphael positioned himself in front of her, shoulders squared, fingers twitching with restrained violence. She grabbed the back of his jacket, pulling him closer, whispering words she didn't even realize she had inside her. "Don't leave me." Raphael didn't turn, didn't speak, but his hand slid behind him, finding hers, lacing their fingers together with a certainty that sent heat surging up her spine. "I'm not going anywhere." The door handle rattled. Heavy, threatening. The final confrontation was seconds away, and Raphael's grip tightened, because he wasn't protecting her out of duty anymore. He was protecting her because losing her now wasn't an option. The rattling handle jerked again, harder this time, like someone was trying to rip it clean off the hinges. Raphael shifted his stance, his body widening just enough to block Elena entirely. His shoulders rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths, the kind that came before violence. Real violence, the kind that didn't end until one side was wiped out. Elena gripped the back of his jacket so tightly her knuckles ached. She couldn't see the door from behind him, but she could hear everything. The heavy boots, the muttered threats, the way her ex screamed her name with that same poison that had once broken her from the inside out. Every bone in her body trembled, but Raphael didn't move a single inch away from her. His presence wasn't just protective, it was territorial in a way she had never experienced, in a way that made her chest twist with something fierce and warm. The handle snapped. The door flew inward. The warehouse filled with shouts, several men storming in with guns drawn, but the one leading them, the one whose voice Elena recognized instantly, locked his eyes on her like she was prey he already owned. Raphael's entire body snapped forward. The first gunshot cracked, but Raphael had already thrown Elena to the ground behind a crate and launched himself forward with a speed that didn't look human. He grabbed the nearest man by the wrist, twisting until bone cracked, then whipped his own gun free with the other hand. 2 shots, clean, controlled, dropped the first 2 attackers before they even registered what happened. Elena tried to stay low, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from him. Raphael moved like a storm made of precision and fury, every hit fueled by something deeper than rage, something personal. Her ex screamed her name again. Raphael turned toward the voice, and that was the moment everything inside him snapped. The world blurred. He charged. Her ex raised his gun too late. Raphael slammed into him, sending both of them crashing into the metal shelving behind them. Weapons clattered to the floor. The 2 men struggled, fists flying, metal bending under the force of their bodies. Elena scrambled forward despite the danger, instinct pulling her toward Raphael, toward the man who had risked everything for her. But when she got close, she froze at the sight, her ex clawing wildly at Raphael's face, snarling, screaming that she belonged to him. Raphael's jaw flexed, eyes black with something deeper than anger. He slammed her ex to the ground. The impact shook the concrete. Her ex reached for a shard of metal. Raphael moved first. He pinned the man's wrist, twisting until the shard fell. Then he leaned in, voice vibrating with a cold threat Elena had never heard before. But it wasn't aimed at the man. It was a promise. "You will never touch her again." Her ex spat back something vile, something Elena had heard too many times, but Raphael didn't let him finish. He struck once, a clean, brutal knockout. Her ex collapsed unconscious on the floor. Silence. Heavy. Echoing. Raphael slowly rose to his feet, chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut near his brow. His hair was disheveled, knuckles bruised, breath unsteady. But when his eyes found Elena, something shifted. The fury drained, replaced by something raw and unguarded. She stood, legs shaky, moving toward him like her entire world depended on it. Raphael watched her, jaw tight, expression unreadable, until she stopped inches from him. She lifted her hand and touched the cut on his brow, so gently it didn't even make sense after everything that had just happened. Raphael exhaled sharply, like her touch broke something open inside him. Then she spoke, voice trembling but steady enough to carry the truth she had been holding back for too long. "You saved me." Raphael lowered his head, forehead brushing hers, breath hot against her lips. "I didn't save you," he murmured. "You ran to me first." Those words hit her harder than the gunfire ever had. Because she had. She had chosen him instinctively, without knowing who he was, without understanding the danger, without even thinking. Her body had known before her mind caught up. She leaned into him. He wrapped his arms around her again, but this time it wasn't desperate or chaotic. It was slow, intentional, protective in a way that felt permanent. Sirens wailed outside. His men stormed in moments later, securing the scene. Her ex and his crew were dragged out. Justice, swift and cold, delivered without hesitation. Raphael didn't even look at them. His eyes were only on her. One of his men asked if they should take her home. Raphael answered before Elena could speak. "She's coming with me." Elena looked up, startled by how certain he sounded. But the moment she met his eyes, she understood. This wasn't possession. This wasn't control. This was safety woven into a man who wasn't supposed to offer it. He helped her into the waiting car, sliding in beside her instead of across from her. When she flinched at the sound of a door slamming outside, Raphael reached over, taking her hand gently, grounding her with the warmth of his palm. Her head fell against his shoulder. His hand tightened around hers. The city lights blurred by, and for the first time in her entire life, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She felt like she was running toward someone. When they finally reached his private residence, quiet, secure, untouchable, Raphael guided her inside without letting go of her hand. His staff stepped back instantly, sensing the shift in him, the protectiveness rolling off him like heat. Elena turned to him once they were alone, emotions swirling violently inside her. She opened her mouth to speak, to say thank you, to say more, but Raphael stepped closer and placed a hand on her cheek. "You're safe now." Her eyes flooded, not because of fear, because she finally believed it. She leaned into his chest, arms sliding around him, and Raphael held her like he had been waiting for the moment without even knowing it. His chin rested on her hair. His fingers ran slowly down her spine. His breath steadied against her ear. And in that quiet, suspended moment, the girl who had always lived in fear and the man who had always lived in shadows found something neither of them were brave enough to name. But they felt it, both of them, burning between every heartbeat, the beginning of something dangerous, something deep, something real, something that would change everything. A broken girl seeking safety and a feared mafia boss seeking nothing collided in one desperate, accidental embrace, only to discover the one thing neither expected, a connection powerful enough to shatter their pasts and rewrite their futures. Safety found her, darkness softened for her, and love began where fear used to live. Sometimes the safest place isn't the quietest room or the strongest lock. Sometimes it's the person who stands between you and everything that ever tried to break you. If this story hit your heart, subscribe now, comment your favorite moment, share with someone who loves drama, and stay tuned. Our next fire story drops soon.